I'm Amy Morgan, the feature writer for the San Antonio Marriage Initiative. I'm so delighted today to introduce you to Ashley and Chuck Elliott. They both have backgrounds in counseling and ministry. Chuck earned master's degrees in organizational leadership and education and is a pastor at Bethel Church in Evanston, Indiana. Ashley completed a Master of Science degree in mental health counseling, is a professor at Oakland City University, and oversees the psychology and addictions counseling program. Together, they are certified in 8 different psychoeducational programs. They are going to share how a concept Ashley developed called switch theory pertains to marriage, dating, working through grief, addiction, and even in the workplace. So, Ashley, Chuck, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Excited to chat and just get to connect a little bit more about marriage and what's going on.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Oh, well, we're delighted. I think that the first thing we need to talk about is you guys actually, Ashley, out of your counseling background, right, and your mental health counseling, you developed a concept called switch theory that then you have applied across the board and all of y'all's work as your life coaches and everything. Tell us about that. Unpack it for us.
Yeah. So oftentimes at the beginning of a relationship, we start off in this like positive, intangible mental space. So we have a lot of expectations and they're all really, really good. We think that this person is going to be, everything that we ever wanted, or even if it's a job, we think that the job is going to fulfill us in all of these amazing ways. And so we start out in this positive mental space. We typically have positive thoughts, feelings, and emotions in this positive space. And then in time, we face reality, and sometimes we'll end up having, some unmet expectations, and we'll find ourselves, sometimes momentarily drifting to a negative space with those negative thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And then we'll kind of usually find our way back to a positive space at first. And then we kind of will gravitate back and forth between this positive and mental space. And this is why we call it switch theory, right? We kind of switch back and forth between a positive and negative space. But if we can't switch back and stay in this positive space kind of overall, we really will begin to feel unsatisfied in that relationship and that job. And we'll find ourselves maybe wanting to leave, maybe just being emotionally absent, and we'll pretty much feel stuck in that negative space. So we've developed switch theory to try to help people kind of understand that intangible emotional state that you're like, we got to get there. And sometimes all of my negative thoughts about any person, I'm pointing at you right now.
I'll be the example. That's fine. Yeah.
They're all housed in like the same part in our brain where like, earlier you were the nice husband who was helpful and you loved me. And then now all of a sudden I'm like, I can remember all of the negative things. And so I don't know, I haven't done the brain research, but I don't know exactly what happens, but everyone I talk to seems to identify with this negative space that we get into and how we desire to get back to this positive space. So that's where we've developed switch theory.
And it has many applications. You guys do, first of all, of course, Chuck, you are a pastor, but you guys do, you counsel people through the church then, but also you have a life coaching business and a life coaching practice, I guess is probably a better way to say that, where you really help people and you use switch theory in all these applications. So talk about marriage, because that's kind of where we started, and that's where we came Sammy with our marriage champions. How do you guys use that definition of switch theory to help people in your coaching and help people as they are working through their marital concerns?
What we help people do is to identify some of the thoughts, feelings, and maybe even behaviors that happen when they're in a negative space, and some of the thoughts, feelings, behaviors when they're in a positive space. And it helps them to recognize, okay, I'm hanging out a lot of time in this negative space. I need to do the work. And we call it getting current. We need to get on the same page. If we have any unresolved issues, if I have an unmet expectation, I need to communicate about it. Instead of just putting it in my file folder of all the negative things I don't like about my partner, if I can address it, then we can get on the same page, get current, and then we can be in a positive space. So we try to be as practical as we can. And sometimes you have to track things back a little bit in the relationship if you're working with a couple and saying you had an expectation, maybe even for the whole marriage, that you thought your partner was going to be, you fill in the blank. and they haven't met that expectation. And maybe at the beginning of the relationship, you weren't clear about your expectations. You just thought that's the way marriage was done. And then you have this tension that's between you, and you've never talked about it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that that expectation is completely wrong, but once it's unmet, we can often feel disrespected or like the person doesn't care about us, and confirmation bias starts coming in, and we start looking for that person to not care about us, and we're building this negative space up. It's almost like we're building a house in this negative space when we don't need to be, and it can really be detrimental to the relationship.
Yeah. One of the exercises I like to do with people is to just help them first understand what their positive space looks like,
Yeah.
and what their negative space looks like. And so in a positive space, I tend to get more sleep. I tend to feel more hopeful about my relationships. I tend to feel like I can manage the world. And one of my negative space thoughts is I can't do all the things, right? Like imagine like juggling. I'm like, I can't do this,
Overwhelmed,
right?
yeah.
I'll feel overwhelmed. And so for me to understand what my positive space thinking looks like, my behavior, all those things as well, and then understand kind of what happens when I dip into this negative space. What are those like common thinking patterns and behavioral patterns when I get in a negative space? That helps me to then recognize like, oh, I'm in a negative space. I want to get back to a positive space. So maybe this is time for a little timeout. I go to my room, I might pray and ask the Lord for some guidance, and then try to come back and say, oh, I want to say I'm sorry for something because I know that I need to, and I say sorry, but then I also ask for what I need. And so it's not just rainbows and butterflies, understanding what this positive space is. It's to say, I want to have a win in the relationship. I want to have positive expectations, and I want to ask for what I need. But I also want to acknowledge whenever I'm kind of dipping into this negative space where I'm kind of maybe going to spiral.
Well, and as you're talking about this spiral, and we talked a lot about that too, about, everyone's going to have circumstances in life that are going to put you in a negative space, but to not camp there.
For
And
sure.
and how you and that's what you've created, some resources to help people realize, again, what that looks like, and then how to, if they want to get out of it. We want to get out of a negative space. We don't want to feel those feelings toward our spouse. We don't want to feel those feelings towards our boss. We want to stay. But then how to do that? Let's talk about some of your resources. You've got some courses on Right Now Media, right? That are, we can access them there for our marriage champions.
Yeah. Yeah. So Why People Leave is one of our resources that's there. And we look at why people leave, the cognitive processes that people go through before they leave, which is switch theory. We teach on that and kind of go through some examples. But our goal is to help people stay, right? We want to stay in our jobs. We want to stay in our marriage whenever we can, right? And so we do like throw out the caveat, right? If you're in an abusive relationship, that's the time whenever you go ahead and you get yourself safe. We're not asking you to stay then. But if we can kind of go through the process of understanding this positive and negative space and what's going on, then we can learn to ask for what we want and kind of meet our needs in a healthier way. And hopefully that us being assertive, and then if we're teaching it to our partner, if we're learning it together, like we're both trying to get our needs met, and that can help us not feel the need to leave quite as much.
And as we teach on this, we found, like you said earlier, it has lots of different applications. And what we do is we work with businesses as well, because oftentimes employees will get into a negative space about their job. And if they don't get back to a positive space and manage their unmet expectations, they're more likely to leave that job. And if you see the high rate of turnover in some people who go from job to job to job, and they don't address the underlying issue of maybe unrealistic expectations, not working on their communication skills, then they're going to leave. So we see the different applications for why people leave. It's why people leave marriages, they leave churches, they leave jobs, they leave all kinds of relationships. And you were talking about that for ministry a little bit. In the church, a lot of times people have expectations for a church. They have expectations for their faith. And when they don't address those, when they're unmet, they'll disengage. They'll disengage in the faith community. They'll disengage in their relationship with God because they don't address those unmet expectations.
And we see this in marriages as well. Sometimes people leave physically, but sometimes they just leave emotionally.
Absolutely.
And that can be the safer first step for people. And so if that's in the workplace or in a church or in a marriage, if we realize that there's distance between us and our partner or us and this particular person, if we try to lean in, right? The natural tendency is like, oh, you're pushing me away. I'm going to kind of push you away.
Distance.
But if we try to lean in and we ask about it, then we can understand they're in a negative space and this is why, this is what we can do about it. But our emotions don't often think that rationally, right? We're like, you're mad at me and I don't like you, right? And understanding like there's some needs that are there. And if we can, get to a calm space and a positive space and talk through our particular needs, usually we can be empathetic with one another and actually get to work on meeting those needs.
Well, and you mentioned too that you help couples see that they have a broader range of choices than they might have thought they did. You talked about the talking or the don't talking, or that they have not just a binary choice. So let's talk about that a little bit, how you do that work, because that was interesting to me too. I hadn't really heard that before.
Yeah, people often feel trapped because they feel like they just have two options. If there's conflict in the relationship, I feel like I can talk about it or I can not talk about it. And we feel like it's that or that, but there's tons of options. Okay. You can speak about it. You can not speak about it. You can do it in a positive way. You can do it in a negative way. And there's all of these different ways that we handle it. It's like, I can not talk about it and actually let it go, or I can not talk about it and be passive aggressive. I can talk about it in a positive way that I'm being hopeful from a positive space. I can talk about it in a negative way that I'm tearing down the relationship even more and speaking out of that negative space, negative thoughts, feelings, and emotions. I'm saying, you don't care about me. You don't want to be with me. And I'm doing more distancing type talk.
And often in our negative space, when we're not talking about it, that's whenever we see a lot of this kind of toxic or negative behavior, because we'll engage in triangulation where we're going to another person and we're talking, and that makes us feel better in that relationship. But then it kind of creates further distance in this relationship. And then if we repair it, then that's messed up. And so we just feel like we get in this icky mess where we don't know how to fix the relationship. And so again, it's like, if we had just talked with the person we were mad at, but I did that before and that didn't work. But whenever we analyze, we're like, but you talked when you were in a negative space. You didn't talk. Maybe one time, but you didn't talk about it in a positive space. And so as we can kind of dissect it a little bit and say, okay, which of the four options, speaking in a positive space, speaking in a negative space, not speaking in a positive space or not speaking in a negative space, which one of those is my go-to? Which one is the one that's causing problem, and kind of just looking at those behaviors. Am I, slamming a door? Am I stonewalling? Am I refusing to answer your phone calls, or whatever it might be that I'm doing? Let me look at those negative behaviors that aren't serving me very well. And maybe even we first ask that question, how are they serving me? Are they getting my needs met? And then if they're not, then let's get to work on meeting those needs in a healthier way.
We found so many times that couples and individuals, they feel trapped. They feel like they don't have options. And what if we just throw out all the options there are? Let's just be crazy with it, all the different things. So to handle conflict, what I can do is I just walk into the room and I throw a paper airplane at Ashley with what I'm frustrated about. It's written on there, and then I run out of the house. Okay. Have you tried that? No, you haven't tried everything. Okay. And that's a silly example, but there's lots of options, and it's so worth it to continue to work on it. You know what? You start again. You start working on the relationship again and again and again. And you keep on going back to it, because we find, especially with conflict, and if anybody's dealing with an addiction, certainly it's tense. It's difficult to have those conversations, and you have to have them multiple times, and you keep working on it to get through those situations. And just because it didn't work well the first time, the one time, doesn't mean it was the wrong choice to communicate about it.
Well, and you also talk about the power of prayer and the power of scripture, and that this is not a journey that anyone has to undertake on their own and can't really. And you have created some resources to help couples with that too. Your devotionals, and also available. Those are on the Bible app, correct?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, we love to help people grow spiritually. And that is something that is one of the most important elements in our work, that if we can help point people to Jesus, then Jesus is going to help increase our self-awareness and help convict us where we're struggling. But certainly we like to use, a little triangle with God up here at the top, And then each of the individuals, like I'm one of the bottom pieces and you're one of the bottom pieces. Like if we are pursuing God together, then we're getting closer to God, but we're also getting closer to each other. And so we call this spiritual intimacy. This is a term that has existed, but kind of we take a little bit of a different spin on it. But we are trying to pursue God together. And so we're comfortable with each other to pray together, to talk about spiritual topics. And it isn't something that just happened overnight. It wasn't, our first date that we're just super comfortable. It's something that grew over time. And so we like to help couples to just determined to be on a journey to grow spiritually together, to become more spiritually intimate, and to bring God into conflicts, to bring God into the best parts of your relationship, even sexuality and all of that God
Absolutely.
made us. He made us amazing individuals, and we can bring him into the middle of our relationship.
Well, I think that would be something that our marriage champions would be really interested in, and they can find those things there. You also have a book that's getting ready to come out. Let's talk about that, because you do some work in grief, and based out of your own experience. You guys met in college, so that's been a little bit of time ago. But you've had some experiences in your life, and you wrote some resources then, and then the new book that's coming out. So unpack that for us.
Yeah, well, the book's been in the making for several years now, but we were excited that we got a deal to do the book, and it comes out next year in 2023, looking at like August. So the title of the book is I Used to Be Blank, and you fill in the blank. I used to be married. I used to be a daughter, a son, a parent, a business owner. It could be lots of things. Some people even put in there, I used to be part of a family, and they feel like their family isn't what it used to be. And what we try to do is focus on the relationships and think about how people's worlds have changed, and how do we help coach them and seeing what does it look like to move forward, not moving on like you're forgetting about what it is that, or who it is that you lost, but what does your next step look like, integrating who you are now with who you feel like you used to be.
Yeah. Look at all the unseen elements of grief and loss that you sometimes don't talk about it. So whenever you go to work, you feel like, I can't function, I can't work. And maybe we don't always feel that people see us at work. And so we need an escape plan sometimes. Like, what do I do when I get into a meeting and I just am triggered to experience grief? And so we talk about defense mechanisms and the way that we can kind of act in a protective way to help us to feel okay. And so again, we look at those unmet needs. And so let's see, how is displacement helping our relationship? Well, first, what is displacement? If I'm upset at Chuck and I'm talking to my kids and I start yelling at my kids, I'm displacing my frustration at Chuck onto the kids. And sometimes we will do that with grief. Like, what I'm really upset about is the loss of a job, loss of a relationship, the loss of a loved one. In our situation, it was loss of recurrent babies, like recurrent miscarriage was part of our story. And it was just this continuous journey of struggle and questioning and seeking the Lord, saying, do you want us to try again? And this has been a lot of trauma. And so we would have triggers. And so we would try to say, okay, what are those needs? What are those going on? We might displace whenever I'm frustrated at him, take it out on the kids. But what's that need that's really there? I need to deal with my sadness. I need to deal with my grief, or else I'm going to continue to be triggered. And the longer that we go without dealing with all of our stuff, the less able we are to track down, like, which thing am I mad about? I'm just mad at all of my relationships. And so we've got to work to kind of repair and kind of identify some of those needs, some of maybe the maladaptive behavior that comes as a result to try to meet those needs.
And we see with grief, there's a lot of seen and unseen elements to grief, because you know what a grieving person looks like. It's not just somebody who's crying sitting on a couch at home. It looks like somebody who's smiling walking down the hallway at work. You don't know what that person might be dealing with. And we kind of addressed that from your point of view, because Ashley and I, after some of our losses, went back to work like right the next day, or we were on stage at church leading. And you just don't know what people are dealing with in different moments. And your world can be completely wrecked, but it looks the same, but you don't know if it's supposed to look the same. And it's all of those confusing emotions. And how do you process that?
And I can imagine that would be very impactful in a marriage. That's something so very personal, losing a baby. I mean, that's your little person together. And then, that's something that really can impact you, and that both need to grieve, separately and together, I would think.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we talk about how people grieve differently.
We do.
I don't grieve the exact same way as any other person, but especially just the person that I live with, we're not going to grieve the same way. So us kind of making room for each other to grieve differently. Some might want to talk about it all the time, and some might not want to talk about it all the time,
It's
but
true.
trying to make sure that we're understanding one another's needs and trying to help them, again, get their needs met so that they can grieve and process and heal, so that eventually down the road they're able to help others, because that's our main goal in the book, that
Yes.
or one of our main goals. We do want to help people heal in general, but if we help someone heal and that person then helps someone else heal, then it is just magnified so much. And so we are often feeling alone whenever we go through loss, but we're not alone. We have a lot of people around us, even in just small cities, who are grieving. And if we can learn to say, I'm going to be a little bit more vulnerable and share with someone, I'm going to get better so that then I can be that person. So one of the things that I've done, and I was thinking about this morning that I need to do again, is I've taken one person who has gone through miscarriage and I've prayed for her. I'm going to cry. I've prayed for her pretty much every day of her pregnancy. Once I found out, I put a reminder and I was like, I'm going to pray for her. And she's had her baby. And actually, Chuck and I were up at church the other day, and I nudged him and I said, he was singing a song about miracles. I was like, I see a little miracle. And the baby had headphones on, and it was so sweet. And I was like, God's so good. He answers our prayers. And so we rejoice over the good things. And so the thing that I want to do, again, like, I need to find someone else that's going to be the person that I pray for. And so I don't have to try to pray for absolutely every single person in the world. But if I can work through my journey and try to get to a place where I can pray for one person, then I can make a difference. And so we do small things, we do big things, but we know that even the difference for one person is just magnified.
And that talks about like leaving a legacy, which we talk about, because we all probably have met somebody in our life or have a family member who didn't process grief in the best way, and it had an impact on the family. What if a father, what if a mother after a loss could process the grief maybe better than average? What if they could do a good job of healing and they were more emotionally available for the rest of their family? They could connect emotionally to other people and other relationships, and they could go there without just the fear of losing another loved one. You could be more available. And we see the impact that it has on a family, because in working with grieving people, all kinds of things come up that you haven't resolved, maybe with grief, when another grief happens. And if we can help people to be more healthy, it can make a difference for the rest of your family, for legacy, for generations to come. Your grandkids, your great grandkids could be more healthy relationally and emotionally because you handle grief in a healthy way.
And you have a course on Right Now Media for that too, right? The In Love and Loss course.
Yeah,
we do. It's on Right Now Media, and you can find that on our website. And it guides people through that. It coaches them through it. And we go there and we name what it is that hurts, what it is, who it is, what it is that we've lost, for the purpose of healing.
Yeah, one of our goals with the program was to create something that people can start right now in their pajamas, in their bedroom, with no one seeing the tears or any of that stuff, and that they can get started. And so it is therapeutic. It's not therapy, but you can watch it, and we've made them bite-sized. Just less than 15 minutes. Some of them are even shorter than that. And then we give journal prompts. And so we've used this in coaching and counseling sessions with individuals. And it's so helpful for people just to give themselves space to think about it and to process. And so we kind of walk through some simple fill in the blanks, like, I am grieving blank. And so there's something powerful to just naming your grief and to admitting it to yourself. And so we can think, that's simple. But somehow, as we're giving ourselves space to give ourselves permission or to identify what it is, then we can see that need a little more clearly and kind of link some of those dysfunctional behaviors and the trauma that we're experiencing from it, and kind of identify maybe what's there beneath the surface.
Oh, well, I think that is so needed and so valuable. And I think our marriage champions will really find that a valuable resource. I know you have another kind of a service or another arm of your organization too, where you do creating a marriage plan, helping people be proactive, especially those kind of early on, as well as those who kind of need to do a hard reset. But you tell us about that, because that's a really important aspect of your work as well.
Yeah, we find that oftentimes in relationships, we don't end up where we want to be because we don't have a plan.
Mm.
So whether you're just getting married or you've been married for several years or maybe even a decade or more, we often find that we're not where we want to be. So let's come up with a plan. If you're going to build a house, you do the foundation first, you do the framing, you do all of those things before you do all the shiny extras at the end. So what we do is we work with couples to help establish a vision, a plan. What are the goals? What do you want to accomplish together as a couple? What kind of a marriage do you want to have? Do you want to have strong communication skills? That's great. That's just a wish unless you have a plan for it.
Mm-hmm.
So what we do is we break down working with a couple for like up to a year, and we take the first few months and we come up with a plan. What is it you want to work on? What do you want your relationship to look like? And then we have goals that we're going to meet with that couple over that time. And then each set of months after that, what we do is we do a checkup, and then we make it even stronger. We find out, how do we have an awesome relationship? How do we have an awesome marriage? What do we want for our kids? What do we want for our family? Do we want our family to be established on faith? Okay, what does that look like? Well, we have to do devotions as a family. We have to make this a priority. When you get to the end of your life, do you want to say that you took so many trips, or you traveled, or you did these things, or maybe you raised enough money for a couple of years in a row because you didn't do Christmas presents and you dug a well or started an orphanage somewhere? Mm-hmm. All these things sound like they're great ideas, and that's something that somebody else does, but normal people can do that if they have a plan.
Yeah.
So that's what we want to work on.
And we take the individual couple, or so the couple, through this program as an individual. So for some, we're going to really talk about money and how that's going to fit into their plan, or if there's tension or struggles there, or we're going to talk about children and whether or not to have children, or how to parent if they're already. And so we'll talk about the things that maybe have been a little bit of rubs, if there's the tension there where they have had this plan, maybe that they never communicated, and now it's not happening the way that they wanted. And so we have some assessments and some questions and different things that we use to help with different trouble zones that people might face. But we do want to help people not just think from a trouble state of mind, but from this visionary state of mind, that there is hope and that marriage can be better than average. It doesn't have to be miserable, right? People often say, oh, I've been married for 50 years. And you might look at the person and you're like, I'm not sure that I want that kind of marriage. And so this is kind of where we go back to that switch theory. Like, I think that they stayed in the negative space. And so they withdrew emotionally, and they have their own bedrooms, and they might love each other, but they really don't like deeply feel connected. And so, we do believe that people can be married and be in a positive space. And it doesn't mean they are without conflict or without challenges, but that they've maybe set out a plan. They've talked about expectations, and they've worked through those areas that they have strong values in. So, for example, like children and raising them to follow God, right? You got someone early in a marriage, like, oh, I'm Catholic, and this person's Christian, and it's fine. We're okay with it. But asking those questions, like, let's think about a vision. What about when you have kids?
How's our faith going to develop?
Because suddenly we care. We don't care as much, like, oh, you can do you and I can do me, but my kids are going to do me. And then you're like, my kids are going to be, and so suddenly there's some areas where if we do get on the same page, we get a vision for it, then it can really help, prevent barriers or problems down the road.
And people can reach out to you through your website and connect with you, and you do that on electronically, right? So they don't have to be in the Indiana area. They can do that just anywhere. So
absolutely, yeah, across the country. I mean, internationally, we can talk to people and do it virtually, just like this.
That's just wonderful. I keep hearing you use the word unmet expectations. That seems to be something that is another place where people really kind of rub all the way around, right?
Absolutely. And a lot of times we just kind of start feeling like we don't want to engage with somebody, and you just feel the distance happening. Maybe it's with a friend or an acquaintance, and you start pulling away, and we don't often analyze it and say, well, I expected this. Well, was that a right expectation? Is that something that you need to address? And something that I've worked on, I'm not as quick to communicate as Ashley is. And sometimes I'll have something that could be a frustration, and I'll wait a little bit longer to communicate about it than she might. I was like, okay, so I had an unmet expectation. Is this something that's going to like build that house in the negative space? Am I looking for something else now that she's doing that makes me feel disrespected or insulted or not cared about? Or is this something that I need to get current with? Do I need to address this unmet expectation? And it could be something that she didn't even know was an expectation. She didn't agree to it being an expectation, but I'm getting mad at her and she has no idea.
Yeah. One of the concepts you said was getting current. And we got that concept from one of the marriage trainings that we've gone through. We've tried to find the author of this statement. We haven't been able to find it yet, but anyway, we use it frequently. Like, let's get current. So if I'm frustrated, I've had unmet expectations, then how do we make it better if I don't communicate, right? Like, I'm mad at Chuck. I have unmet expectations. I expected you to, we'll say, do the dishes, right?
Sure.
Like, I expect you to do the dishes. Like, I'm mad. Like, I'm not going to talk about it. How interesting is that? Like, so I'm going to do the dishes and I'm going to stay mad, but I'm never going to communicate with him. So becomes a lose-lose if I don't communicate. And so then I'm not current with him. So then the next day he's like, oh, you want to go out to eat? And I'm like, no. And he's like, she's a crazy woman, right? Like, what happened? Like, well, I have unmet needs, uncommunicated unmet needs. And so if I don't practice asking for what I want, then I won't get my needs met. And so it creates this vicious cycle of unhappiness because I've actually learned to cope, right? I have unmet expectations. What am I going to do? I'm not having expectations, right? Have you ever tried that? Like, I'm not going to have expectations. Like, well, then we have expectations for it to fail or whatever. And so we just can't completely get rid of our expectations. So it's hard, but we might say, I'm going to develop none, but then we end up, still feeling unhappy.
Dissatisfied.
Yeah.
Well, I think that is really important. I've heard, some other people say that seems to be a recurring theme, that the unmet expectations are a real problem in marriage. Mm-hmm. So I like that you guys have a plan and a way to help people kind of solve that problem and to work through for some better practices. So I'm sure that is something that our marriage champions are going to be really interested in. Oh, and Ashley and Chuck, this has been just great. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Absolutely. It's our privilege.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Well, it was great talking to you. And marriage champions, as always, if you'd like to know more about Ashley and Chuck Elliott, you can find them at samarriage.org.